I am delighted to be a part of the Little Markets Conversation with Changemakers series to celebrate International Women's Day. The Little Market is a nonprofit organization that I love so much. The Little Market's committed to breaking the cycle of poverty for women globally. And I'm here with the legendary and inspiring activist and a personal hero of mine, the wonderful, the amazing, beautiful Dolores Huerta. Dolores, welcome.
Hi, Eva.
I love seeing you. Huh?
I said, so wonderful to be here with you.
Oh, I'm so happy to see you. Where are you right now?
I'm in Bakersfield, California.
Oh, you are? So you're home.
Mm-hmm. It's been home.
Oh my, well, good. I'm glad. We need to bubble wrap Dolores so she's with us for 100 more years.
Oh, thank you, Eva.
We have so much to talk about today. There's going to be so many topics we're gonna cover. I first want to talk about feminism, and you've been such a champion of women's rights, and it just seems like a good place to start, like a really big macro conversation about like what does feminism mean to you, and how does that look in activism?
Well, I think feminism and activism kind of go together. I think that's what the word feminism means. And it's important that we use that word because although we know that women, we are more than 50% of the population, not all women are feminists. And this is very important when we talk about women's rights, women's gender equality, and that if we can really know and expand our power and get more women to become feminists, we know that we become a lot stronger and we're really able to achieve some of the goals that we need for women.
Yeah. So many, you've been an activist your entire life, and you started at a time where women didn't always have a voice within the movement, right? Like the civil rights movement kind of, it was a great thing, but like it did, push women off to the side. Like you guys can make coffee and cupcakes for the meetings that we're going to have, but you didn't do that. You were forced during that time. What did you have to navigate at that time, in the 60s, to make sure your voice was heard?
Yeah, I think you said it the way that it was, Eva. And even though we're always on the front lines for the picket lines, for the marches, making strategic ideas and decisions. And yet, when it came to the boardrooms, that's where the women were left out. So you really pointed that out very, very vividly and the way that it was. And we know that that's one of the things that we have to change, and that women have to demand to say, hey, I'm not only just going to do the coffee and the cupcakes, but I also want to be sitting at the board when the decisions are being made.
Mm-hmm. So many people didn't know that you were the one that did so many of those decisions for the United Farm Workers. People, you give so much credit to Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez is amazing, but you were your own force in that movement. And so I'm glad that people are starting to understand the important role that you had during that time.
Yes, and I think that I guess many of women that, as I said before, that were right there doing a lot of the work, but oftentimes not getting the credit. Although I do have to say in the Farmworkers movement, we did have a lot of great women, including Cesar Chavez's wife, Helen Chavez. But unfortunately, their voices were not always heard, and their faces were not always seen.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about, we're celebrating International Women's Day, which really is a celebration, but also forces us to look at the intersectionality of women. Gloria Steinem talks about this a lot. You've talked about this a lot, about the intersectionality where race meets gender. What in your mind, what does it mean to be an intersectional feminist, right? Like not only being a white woman for women's rights, but like, hey, there's Black and brown women back here that need even more help. What are your thoughts on intersectional feminism?
Well, I think it's not only about diversity to make sure that we are inclusive. And I have to say that about Gloria Steinem. When we were working together in the 60s, wherever Gloria went, whatever important event she was at, she would be sure to invite me to make sure that the Latino voices were heard, and of course, workers' voices were heard. But it also means that we not only work on women's issues, but that we also have to work on climate change. We have to work on labor issues that affect women and also, of course, affect men. We have to work on the issues of education, of racial equality, all of these issues. And now we have seen that, of course, we have many women that are at the front, you might say, of the march now on many of those issues. And of course, starting with the Women's March a couple of years ago, that has really shown that women not only can take leadership, but women can start entire movements like Black Lives Matter, like the Me Too movement, where women have been at the front of those movements.
Yeah. And I think Gloria Steinem has also said many times, there is no civil rights movement without women of color. Like she's like, actually, the very definition of activism has mostly been birthed by women of color and being at the forefront of making sure our voices are heard and seen. And there's so many great pictures of you both from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. I mean, you guys have done a lot together for the advancement of that. And to know, your oppression is my oppression, right? Like women's rights have kind of been in a landslide. Specifically, there's been a dismantling of our rights, whether it's the right of our bodies, so many issues that affect us. One being the pay gap, right? We still have this insane pay gap, and you've spent your whole life working with some of the poorest and most vulnerable workers, but I'm always appalled to see the Latina pay gap when it comes to corporate jobs or office jobs. Like you've been fighting for farm worker rights and some of the people that don't even have a livable wage. So imagine once you're one of those Latinas who made it out of high school, made it to college. Now you have a job, right? Those are very hard obstacles in itself. And now you do the same job as a man and you make 57 cents to the man. 54 cents to the white man. Let's look at some data about the gender pay gaps, just so people can understand how bad this is. So women globally earn less than men. The global pay gap is around 23%. So that means on average, women have to work about 4 extra months per year before they can earn the same amount as their male colleagues. That's mind-blowing. In the United States, women on average earn about 82 cents for every dollar of their male counterparts. But as you and I already spoke about, all women are not the same. Women of color generally earn less than their male counterparts and their white male colleagues. Specifically Latinas, they only earn 54 cents to their white male counterparts. Does this still astonish you that we're in 2021 and we still have this wide of a pay gap specifically for obviously our women of color?
Well, it doesn't, of course, surprise me, but also we have seen that with the pandemic that so many women, millions of women have lost their jobs. Many of them may not be able to get those jobs back. So we see that women as a whole have really been hit very, very hard by the pandemic. And of course, these are some of the things that we have to change. The other thing, too, is when we think of women getting promoted into, again, supervisorial positions, into management positions, in California, our governor, Gavin Newsom, he has, and the legislature, they actually passed a law that every corporation that is doing business in California has to have a woman on their board. And so that progress, you might say, is so slow. We might think, wait a minute, we know that women are great leaders, they're great managers. I get to start with being a wife and taking care of the kids and working at the same time. So we have this enormous gap that we have of leadership where we know that women are great managers, great leaders, and they need to be promoted to supervisorial positions, managers positions. And yes, they should have equal pay for men and for women for the jobs that they do.
100%. And it's, since the Lilly Ledbetter Act, that passed to ensure that women have a pathway to seek that equal pay. We haven't seen a lot of progress since then, and we haven't seen a lot of enforcement. You know, you were the one that taught me it's one thing to pass the law, it's another thing to enforce it, right? So like your state and your local governments have to enforce it, whether it was provide water in the fields for farm workers. Who's checking on that? Where's the accountability? And so I think that's with activism, it's like your job is never done. You know, you pass the law, that's good. Now we have to enforce the law, and then if the law is not abided by, then how do we aggregate and make sure that our voices are heard? Do you ever get tired, you know, of the never-ending fight, Dolores, for the advancement of women's rights?
Well, no, we know that this is one struggle that we cannot abandon. Because it really, you know, I could go so far as to say that saving our world depends on women. You know, we have to have women in leadership. We have to have women as presidents, women as governors, women as legislators. Because the one thing about women is that women care about family, they care about children, they care about the environment. And we know that if we have women, and I love to quote Coretta Scott King, who said, "We will never have peace in the world until women take power." I know that is a very, very deep and a very profound statement, but I really do believe in that because I believe that women, we're very compassionate. We think more about sharing, and it's not so much about who gets the credit and who gets the blame, but to make sure that everybody can participate, that people are equal. And women, I think, have more of a tendency to believe in those values, and that's why we need to have women as leadership.
100%. How exciting is it to have Kamala Harris as the first vice president, to hold that position?
Well, that is an inspiration, I think, for every little girl in the United States of America, and especially because she's a woman of color. And that again, just by her being a woman of color, that again, it was able to knock down so many discriminatory thoughts and so many discriminatory practices that we currently have in our society.
Yeah. What do you think, what would be your advice to women, you know, on International Women's Day? Like you said, women's rights is a struggle we can't afford to abandon. And I don't know where the finish line is. All I know is we have to keep running towards it. What advice do you have for women today who, you know, I felt like when Hillary ran, a lot of women were like, we'll see another woman come along, not her, but another one, and not realizing how hard it still is to get women in higher positions in government. What do you say to these younger generations? Are you inspired by their activism, or do you feel like they need to understand the history and jump in even deeper?
Well, I think that we've all been inspired by seeing so many young women that have joined the protests and the marches of the Black Lives Matter movement, the leaders in the environmental movement, the young women from Parkland, Florida, like Emma Gonzalez, that have been out there also marching against guns and gun violence. These young women are so inspirational. And so I just want to say to all the young women out there, go out there and recruit more young women to come and join the ranks. Be sure and talk about women's reproductive rights because we know that this is an issue that is being used politically to divide women and to divide our country. And then be brave, you know, get out there and be missionaries. We have to not only recruit people, but inform them about the issues that are important to women. And also, we have to say that are important for children also. And we as women are the ones that can be in the vanguard for fighting for the rights and representation and recognition of women, but also for the rights and recognition and the resources that we need for our children.
Yeah. Were you surprised, you know, you fought so hard, you have fought and continue to fight so hard for migrant workers. Speaking of women, and as you said, women care so much about family and children. Why isn't there more support at the border for this family separation and putting kids in cages? When that happened, I thought, oh, you just wait. All of these mothers of all walks of life are going to come down hard, and they're going to be upset about any child in a cage. And that didn't happen.
Well, I believe because they have been you might say, targeted in many ways. This is where the racial discrimination comes in. They have been kind of viewed as being invaders to our country. And this is really sad because of the callousness that this creates in our humanity. And also sometimes because we just don't have an organized way to be able to get out to people and explain to them that people are escaping terror. People are trying to save their children from being killed and escaping violence. And so I guess maybe we just have to do a better job, Eva, of really informing people why people are coming to the United States, because they're escaping poverty and they don't want to see their children killed. And then I think, because I do believe that the majority of the people in the United States, that they are good-hearted, that they are, and they would care about what's happening to the children that are being separated from their parents, and many of whom, as we know, have died. And so we are a compassionate society, but we've got to find more ways that we can kind of expand and maybe through social media and other ways, let other people know, give the personal stories of these families so they can understand and be welcoming, just as we always have been for all immigrants that came to this country. And we have to remind people that the first immigrants that came to the United States were from Europe, okay? And I think if we kind of remind people, then they can understand why families that came here from Europe, that they were escaping fascism or escaping the poverty in their countries when they came to this country that we call the United States, or as Native Americans call it, Turtle Island.
100%. I think you're right. There has been such a calloused approach to humanity, whether it's school shootings, whether it's police brutality. We've seen so many that people become numb, right? They become numb to it. Oh, what can I do? Oh, that's just normal. It's not normal. This is not, these civil injustices are not normal. And I think we have to continue to beat the drum that there's still so much work to be done. You hit it right on the head when you talk about organizing. Talk about the importance of grassroots organizing, because I think sometimes people get overwhelmed with the world issues, like whether it's children at the border or poverty or world hunger, or they go, oh, this is just too big. But what people don't know is it's community organizing, community by community, that makes huge difference. Not the president of the United States. It's these moms that are upset. It's these, people who want to, change the way, somebody's elected to their school board. It's the common man, common person that really is going to create the change in their communities. Talk about that grassroots organizing and why is it so important? What does that mean, grassroots organizing?
Well, it really means sort of kind of like a people to people. And what would be our organizing venue? It could be your kitchen. It could be your front room. It could be to invite a few people over and talk about these issues. Tell them about why it's important for women to have reproductive rights, why it's important to have gender equality, why it's important to have equal pay. And we can do it a few women at a time, 3 to 4, some of our neighbors, our vecinos, people that we know, our relatives and friends, and then ask them to do the same thing and have a little kitchen camaraderie and talk to a few of their friends. And if every woman that is listening to us today, Eva, you and me, if they could do the same thing, we could expand our numbers in our women's movement tremendously. So that's what it's kind of something like a Tupperware party, okay? And so we could talk about the issues, but then the one thing that we have to get across to everybody, that our democracy, as you know, Eva, because you've been right there at the forefront, our democracy is at stake right now, and it's going to take every single one of us women, every single one of us feminists to participate and engage and inform the rest of the folks that we know that they have to also join our movement for women's liberation.
100%. There's so much work that you've done, Dolores. Anytime I read your bio, I'm just exhausted. You've done so much work. You continue to do so much work. Specifically, I love the work you've done to improve the lives of women who work on the farms. And tell us a little bit about the issues that women migrant workers face? Because I think a lot of people assume migrant workers are mostly men, and they don't know how many women and children are in the fields here in the United States, and it is still legal for children to be in the fields. But talk a little bit about the work you're doing with women and protecting them and against sexual harassment or getting livable wages. What is the work you're doing?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because people don't realize that in many, especially our fruit crops and many of our vegetable crops, half of the people that work in the fields are women. And of course, if we think of the world at large, in the other worlds, you have, in other continents, you have the majority of the people that work in the fields are women. And of course, here in the United States, one of the biggest accomplishments that we had with our Farmworker movement, our strikes, our boycotts, was to get toilets. Just get toilets in the fields for women. And we finally, it took us 20 years, Eva, to pass the law at the federal level to get toilets in the fields for women. If you can imagine how humiliating that is. And so we have to keep struggling and have to keep fighting to make sure that they actually get economic rights, and to make sure that all of our farm workers are paid what they should be paid, because they are the essential workers. They put the food on everybody's table every single day. And of course, in California, we have been able to get unemployment insurance and the right to organize. But unfortunately, in many of the states, farm workers do not have those rights. And also to protect farm workers from poisons, from pesticides, because this is, we in the United States, we have the highest cancer rate of the world. And it is because of the pesticides that are put on our food. And so this has to be also a women's issue to make sure that our food is safe for ourselves and for our children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many people don't realize where their food comes from. They go to the supermarket. They think it comes from the supermarket.
Right. Yeah, everything we eat is touched by a farm worker.
Everything we eat, every salad, I don't care if you're gluten-free, soy-free, lactose-free, there's such a concern with what we ingest in our bodies today. We're very aware, does this have soy? Does this have gluten? But we're not highly concerned with the people who pick and produce our food. And I think that's such a shame. And the work that you've been doing is so important to make sure people understand the amount of migrant work and farm worker work that goes in, that touches your daily life, is a lot. Your life is constantly touched every day by a farm worker.
Yeah, and I do want to thank you, Eva, because of your support for the Farmworker movement, because I know you have produced a couple of films about how farm workers are affected, and also your constant presence, because it's not just the films, it's your constant presence to make sure that farm workers are helped. And you're one of the individuals that is really helping farm workers a lot. So I just want to thank you on behalf of all of the farm workers that we work with. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you kidding? You're the one that taught me everything I know. Dolores is the one that mentored me into farm worker work. I asked her a million questions, and she said, why don't you come and learn more? And I think that the other thing people should know, and specifically women, is Dolores has been my mentor for over 20 years, but you don't have to personally know Dolores for her to be a mentor. We can now have mentors through their work. You can study Dolores's work. You can read books about, subjects and people that you want to get information on. And so some people go, oh, I don't have access. Everybody has access, because everybody can be mentored by Dolores. If you just look at her work, look at her interviews, look at everything she's done, look at the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and you too can be mentored by amazing women doing amazing things without ever knowing them. A lot of people don't understand policy affects people. Policy and lawmaking at the end of the day affect people. Does it matter who's making those laws?
Oh, absolutely. I guess we need representation. And, in the United States, we are one of the countries that is kind of down at the bottom. A couple of years ago, we were number 70. I think we're getting better now because we do have more representation now in the Congress, and we have more women that are governors and mayors, et cetera. But we still have a good way to go, because we have to get to the point where we have at least 50% of women, and when I say the word women, I mean the word I want to use the word feminism. I want to use the word feminism because feminism means that you stand up for women's values, because we do have women that are representatives in Congress, et cetera, but they don't necessarily champion women's values. And when I talk about women's values, one of the first ones that I think about is, of course, women's reproductive rights. And so when we think of representation, we have to think of getting feminists elected. Naturally, when we think of feminism, we think of women, but we do know that there are men that are feminists also.
Yeah.
So if we have to choose between a woman who is not a feminist and a man who is a feminist, we want to get the man to represent us to be as a feminist. But and these are really important issues because we know that those that want to divide us, they use women's issues to divide us. And we have to say to women out there, and we have to share this. We have to share this with other people. We have had a great president in Mexico. Everyone knows who he is, Benito Juarez. And he said, he said, respecting other people's rights is peace. I, as the mother of 11 children, and I have to respect women who believe that they have the right to abortion. And I believe in the right to abortion. I think a woman can only make that decision for her own self, and nobody should make that decision for her. Unfortunately, they use women's reproductive rights. They're using that as a club and using it as a divisive way to divide people. So we have to say to women, whichever way you think about this, like I mentioned, I have 11 children. If my daughter, Juanita, decides that she wants to have a dog and a cat instead, that is her choice. If she doesn't want to have kids like I have. So we have to really, and I would ask every woman here, bring up that conversation, initiate the conversation. And the same thing happens with LGBTQ rights. We have to initiate the conversation. Who somebody loves, who somebody lives with, who somebody marries, that is their human right. And we have to respect those rights. And we have to stop this idea of using, women's right to abortion, people's LGBTQ rights. We have to take that weapon away from them and say, no, these are human rights. Everybody has a right to decide for their own body what they want to do with their body.
I remember when I was pregnant and I found out I was having a boy, I said, oh man, I wanted to have a feminist. And somebody very smart said, we need more feminist men than we do women right now. And I thought, oh yeah, my son can be a feminist. Like you're right. I'd much rather have a male feminist than a woman who's against women's reproductive rights in holding office, for sure. We have a new president, and this new president has one of the most diverse cabinets we've ever seen. What do you think about that? And what is your message to this new president? What if you could sit at a table with him, which I'm sure you will, what is your big message for what needs to be done right now in this country?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to do in our educational system is not only teach the true history of the United States of America, the fact that the first immigrants to the United States were from Europe, okay? And that this has always been a brown country to begin with our Native Americans. But also we have to teach racial equality, but also we have to start teaching our kids right there in kindergarten and first grade and on through elementary and high school that women are equal to men. Okay. And we may not have the same physical power that they have, but we have the same intellectual, definitely intelligence and everything else that men have, so that we can start teaching little boys from the time they're very small to teach to treat women as human beings and not as sex objects. And there's a lot that we have to change in culture to be able to change that mindset that men have, that somehow women are not equal. And we have to do this very, very quickly. And I think that right now, and because we know we're going through a big cultural change in the United States of America, and this is the moment right now when women can step in and say, yeah, let's change our whole curriculum to talk about gender equality, to talk about racial equality, to talk about economic equality also. This is a moment that we can do it. And we as women have got to, as we have been doing, take the lead in making this happen.
Yeah, 100%. It's important, representation matters everywhere, government, boardrooms, entertainment, media. And I've been trying to do my part here because talking about, the culture is changing. Culture has to change in order for policy to change. There's never been a major civil rights movement where a politician was the one who said, you know what, we should give women the right to vote. No, women went out on the streets during the suffragette movement and they said, hey, we want to vote. In the civil rights movement, there wasn't a politician who said, you know what, Black and brown people have been really mistreated. We should do something about that. No, people went out in the streets and they made their voices heard. And so, civil disobedience has been very important in our history. And I think culture has a huge part to play, as you said, right now. And so, here in Hollywood, this is why I started my production company. This is why I started directing, because I want to tell the stories from our community. Because if you humanize the issue instead of data and instead of talking points, instead of a politician delivering it, if you do it in a narrative form, if you do it in a documentary like I've done before, if you do it and you put a face to that little kid who's stuck in a cage 2 feet away from his mother crying and the mother can't hold him, that strikes your heart in a different way as opposed to statistics about the border. If you see the reality that a farm worker can't afford the tomato that he picks every day when he goes to the supermarket, that puts a face to the data and reality. And so I feel like that's the part we have here in Hollywood and in the media is we got to do our part to change culture so that, you as an activist, Dolores, can do your part to change laws.
Absolutely. And we have to get everybody to advocate. And, I always like to quote Michael Moore, who in his Broadway show, he said this, he said, when we wake up in the morning, we wash our face, we brush our teeth, and then we call our congressman. And if we can get everybody to do that every single day, then we can make sure that we get good legislation passed, like the Voting Rights Act that's in the Congress, the Immigration Reform Act that we so desperately need, and so many of these other important measures. Because again, women, we have the power, but we just have to use the power that we have.
Women absolutely have the power. And I think that, as we're celebrating International Women's Day, the other thing that women have to realize is we live in a global community. So we don't just live in the United States. What happens in Africa actually affects us. What happens in China actually affects us. And so I think women should realize, we have a lot more in common with our sisters in struggle all over the world. Including, if you do make it a smaller conversation, Mexican women coming or the Central Americans coming across the border, those mothers want the same thing as any other mother here in the United States. They want their child safe and they want, economic opportunity and they'll work hard for it. Right.
And I think we as women have a responsibility for other women that are not as fortunate as we are, whether it be farm worker women here in our own country, women at the border that are refugees, or women in other places where they do not have the rights that we as women have here in the United States of America. And then we have to actually say also to our politicians, we expect you to also help us to make sure that women in other countries get the rights that we have, that the women in every continent have to have the same human rights that women in America have and women in the United States have.
100%. And I think we also have to stop treating women as a special interest group. Like, no, we're half the population. We should have half the power.
Exactly. But we have to work to make sure that power manifests itself. Okay. Just because we are the majority of the population doesn't mean that we automatically have that power. We have got to work to make sure that people know that we have that power, that women really internalize that and then they have to act on it, okay? Because if we want to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed, it's going to be in the Senate of the United States. We are one of the few countries in the whole world that have not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. It's going to be coming to a vote in the US Senate, and we as women have to make sure that it passes.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a part of these conversations that are happening. This is an important conversation so that women who watch us go, oh yeah, I do have the power. Wait a minute. And I think sometimes we're just waiting for permission to be great. And so, Dolores, give women the permission to be great.
Well, if we can just remember those magic words, that we have the power, okay?
We absolutely do. Thank you so much, Dolores. This has been so enlightening as usual. And thank you to the Little Market for creating these conversations with Changemakers during International Women's Day. Thanks so much, Dolores. Keep up the good fight.
And thank you, Eva. Thank you for always being there for everybody. Thank you so much.